Thanks for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan. This is We the Governed, and today we're going to be going to Pierce County to talk about a story that's been in the news, but I'm not entirely sure the way that it's being represented in these various articles here is really expressing the significance of this case. I'm not going to attempt to go through blow by blow every aspect of this fight, but essentially this is boiling down to a legal and political fight between the Pierce County Sheriff Keith Swank and the Pierce County Prosecutor Mary Robnett. Now, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of posturing, and there's certainly a variety of political issues that are involved in this case. I'm going to kind of narrow my focus just on a key element of this because it deals with some local governance issues that I've run into around Washington State, and I think it's going to be relevant to issues possibly where you live as well with future problems or challenges that you may see where you live. But before I jump into it, I just want to encourage you to subscribe or hit the like button down below. Doesn't take any time, but just a few seconds, doesn't cost you anything, but it's worth doing just so that we can share these videos out to a much wider audience so they can see what's going on where they live as well. So let's get back to this, what I think is kind of mostly a political fight, but there's also a lot of legal posturing and some legitimate, very wonkish issues that exist behind the scenes in this fight between Pierce County Sheriff Swank and Pierce County Prosecutor Robnett here. Now, I have, in all fairness, written about Mary Robnett before in the past. There was an article that I wrote. It's linked here. I'll put it down below as well. You can read about it. I might have been a little harsh on her in this article, but I definitely have spent some time paying attention to what's going on in Pierce County. I live in Thurston, so Pierce County is a next-door county to me. Much larger than where I live, much bigger county, and I think it's quite relevant. Whatever happens there does have a pretty big influence and impact around the state. Now, the way this has been presented to the public is mostly that there's a clear dispute between the Pierce County Sheriff, who does want to and would prefer politically to enforce the immigration rules and remove violent sex predators and violent criminals from Pierce County when his law enforcement officers run into him. And those who are illegal immigrants, he certainly would prefer to not have them in the jail, taking up space. He'd prefer that once they get prosecuted to have them sent back to their country of origin. And of course, under Washington state sanctuary laws, and with Bob Ferguson loving these laws, and presumably with the majority Democrats currently on the Pierce County Council, they also would prefer to keep the criminals here. And so this is kind of this is the way the media has typically portrayed this battle. And I think I'm representing that fairly correctly, but the Pierce County Sheriff at this point in time, from what I can see, isn't actively doing anything to violate Washington state sanctuary state laws, but he's definitely a critic of them, and clearly he does want to get these criminals out of the county, and clearly the Democrats who are in the county don't want to get rid of them, and they'd prefer that they stay here. However, the legal fight that's going on, this may be kind of some of the political aspects of it behind the scenes, but that's not really what this legal fight is about. Essentially, what this fight between the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's office about really goes back to a long-running battle that we've had in Washington state's counties now for a while, and it really culminated with this state of Washington case that was a state of Washington ex-rel Gregory Banks, who was a prosecuting attorney of Island County, versus a law firm that had been hired to represent, in this case, some of the Island County commissioners up here. And this case was actually settled in 2018, but the relevance of this case to the Pierce County situation that we're dealing with here is that in Island County, just like Sheriff Swank is arguing right now, in Island County, the commissioners were saying, probably with, based on the evidence that was presented in that case, with really good evidence to show that the prosecutor up there, Banks, was providing them incompetent and marginally valuable, pretty much terrible legal advice consistently for many years. And in order to get better legal advice, the county commissioners in Island County were having to go to outside counsel and bring it in. Now, it's not that outside counsel isn't sometimes brought in to help with legal fights, battles, or advice by county commissioners, but arguably, and this was the case that the Supreme Court decided to uphold, the county prosecutor must approve any of those outside counsel. And if there's a political fight or a battle between the prosecutor and the elected officials in that county, the prosecutor really has substantial leverage here, as the Supreme Court ruled, that basically the prosecutor gets to control the legal advice and constrain the type of information that the elected officials would have. I seriously doubted the founding of our state that this was a conflict exactly that the state founders would have imagined, but it's created some unusual problems, and it's been kind of brewing for about 100 years in the state, and it really came to fruition with the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the prosecutor and against the county commissioners, saying that the prosecutor absolutely has to approve all legal advice or other attorneys that are brought in, that it has to all go through the prosecutor's office, even if the elected officials in that county have demonstrated that the prosecutor's incompetent, the advice is corrupt, the advice they get is bad, there's a history of bad advice, it doesn't matter. The prosecutor's ultimately responsible for that legal advice no matter what. So this is ultimately the fight that you have, that basically Sheriff Swank here is discovering in Pierce County, because he is not trusting the legal advice that's coming from the prosecutor's office. And that's kind of the fundamental element of some of this legal fight that's going on right now. Number one, he doesn't trust that legal advice. He believes it's politically motivated and it's contrary to his goals and beliefs of what he needs to do to protect the people who elected him in Pierce County, to protect him from criminals and to run his office effectively. And that type, it's understandable that he believes this, because I'm going to get into some of the reasons why in a little bit. But on top of that, there's also was a constitutional argument that he had made about the independence of an elected sheriff. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details on that, because really I'm narrowing in on this argument that the prosecutor here, that in this case, Mary Robnett, she's the one who basically controls the legal advice and attorneys that can provide any of that legal advice to any of the elected officials who are in the county. And she has, understandably, what she's doing here is she's basically defending the prerogative of the prosecutor and the position the prosecutor holds in the county. This is similar to the sheriff also defending the prerogative, the elected prerogative of the sheriff in the county as well. It's a reasonable argument for her to make, and it's a reasonable conflict. You don't have to be a bad person to be making these arguments. It's just that was kind of the crux of her argument. In addition, and this is a pretty legitimate argument, I think, that was made in Island County originally. And by the way, this has come up we've seen the same kind of argument come up in Thurston County and other places where there were disputes between the prosecutor's office and the elected officials. This is not alone in Pierce County. It's come up many times before. Liability mitigation. The prosecutor wants to basically ensure that we don't have rogue elected officials running out and getting their own attorneys and getting advice that's substantially flawed from their perspective and potentially exposing the county to more liability. The political element of this in Pierce County is just that she would be trying to prevent the sheriff from potentially enforcing federal law. This would be the argument they're making, is that they don't want him to enforce federal law and actually help ICE deport violent criminals or illegal aliens that the law enforcement comes across. And so she doesn't want to increase that liability. The other thing, and this came up more in the Island County issue, which was about saving the county money, the potential for rogue elected officials to just hire randomly, willy-nilly, super expensive attorneys or possibly attorneys that they don't need, spending lots of money on those attorneys when arguably the attorneys that the prosecutor's office has, they're already in-house, then that's part of the argument. And those are legitimate arguments that you could make as a prosecutor. But essentially, that's the fight. It's not really directly over ICE or enforcing federal immigration law. It's really this battle about, does the sheriff's office have the ability to get independent legal advice, and the courts ruled against him. Now, what really weakens Mary Robnett's, the prosecutor's position here, is that this guy right here is the person who she wants and has assigned, Randy Gaylord, former San Juan County prosecutor. She's assigned this guy to give advice to the Sheriff Swank in Pierce County. And I think that it would be exceptionally difficult to find a worse person in the state of Washington to give advice if you are in Sheriff Swank's position, because there is no doubt that Randy Gaylord is the former prosecutor of San Juan County with a 20-some-odd year record of basically extensive record of attempting to violate people's constitutional rights. I couldn't imagine a worse person to bring into the county. And of course, if you were Sheriff Swank, you wouldn't trust anything this guy tells you either. And to be fair, I've written about Randy Gaylord as well. So Randy Gaylord here was basically, there was a case up that I wrote about a couple years ago. It's here on my website. I'll link to that down below. He actually forced a couple there who had vandalized a political sign into basically a leftist political re-education classes as part of just an abusive, aggressive settlement effort that he pushed in a very political way in San Juan County. If it was just that, though, you could write it off as an election stunt, but it isn't. He's just been doing this for years. I did a video here, again, I'll link to it down below, where Randy Gaylord actively, as prosecutor, physically went in and tried to hide and destroy records, prosecute people who were willing to follow the law, who worked for San Juan County, and all this came out in court in a case that he actually lost, and it was brought by Ed Kilduff here, did an extensive video about this, and this was about Randy Gaylord trying to destroy public records, conceal the truth from the public, violate the law, violate his oath of office, and harass citizens or employees of the county who were trying to do the right thing. But it doesn't stop there. He's just got this extensive history of going back, and he was the one in 2005 who actually prosecuted John Carlson and Kirby Wilbur, who were talk show hosts up in Seattle, for daring to go on the radio and actually supporting a gas tax cut initiative that went on the ballot. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously against Randy Gaylord and said that all of his actions in that case were completely unconstitutional and illegal. The law was actually changed afterwards, but that case took a couple years to go through the court system. And Randy Gaylord has a strong and aggressive history of always violating constitutional rights given the opportunity. So put yourself in Sheriff Swank's shoes. You wouldn't trust this guy either. And it's not just because he's friends with Bob Ferguson. He's thoroughly and absolutely compromised in every aspect of this. And so you bring in somebody like that, I wouldn't blame Keith Swank for pushing back on it. But the Sheriff Swank has a challenge in that the Supreme Court's already ruled that the prosecutor, no matter how bad and garbage and terrible their legal advice is, the Supreme Court said that the prosecutor is entirely in the driver's seat in determining how this thing actually plays out. And so right now, the unenviable position that Sheriff Swank finds himself in is with legal counsel that is clearly not on his side, won't be honest, and has a long track record of being exceptionally bad on anything related to constitutional protections, hyper-partisan, very political, clearly tied into the Ferguson administration as well as the leftists in government throughout Washington state, and that's who your legal counsel is. So I don't blame Sheriff Swank for being concerned and trying to fight this legal fight, because I think even if on the law, the history of the law, he may be wrong, boy, when it comes to this case, it's certainly understandable why he would want to go down this road and get any outside counsel that he could find, because any of them would be better than who's been assigned to his case. Now, this is really, from my perspective anyway, this is part of this key battle that's going on. And unfortunately, the political forces that are kind of aligned on this are, you have the sheriff on one side who wants to protect the citizens. He's been elected by the people of Pierce County, and he wants to protect them from crime and criminals and sex trafficking operations and certainly illegal immigrants who are going to go out there and commit crimes. And then on the other hand, you have a bunch of people who opposed him politically, including a majority, not all of them, but a majority that's on the Pierce County Council, clearly the prosecutor and their political allies in the governor's office and the AG's office, who are basically aligning themselves to sabotage the sheriff. And part of that sabotage effort is to appoint somebody like a Randy Gaylord to actually, in theory, be his legal counsel, but truly be there just as a sabotage agent from the inside. Sure, I know Randy Gaylord's violating his oath of office, rules of code and conduct for attorneys. That's nothing new for him. He's been doing that a long time. And it really puts Sheriff Swank in a tough spot. This is just my perspective on one little element of this case. It's something that I've stumbled on in the past up in Island County and Thurston County and other places. And in order to change it, you would really need actually a pretty significant reform legally to give, under certain scenarios, the elected officials the option to find outside counsel. That could be abused. So from a wonkish policy standpoint, that's something that could be abused. But it's an interesting thing that we've only seen really come to fruition and really come to head in the last probably 10, 15 years in Washington State. And it really puts Sheriff Swank in a tough spot. It also really puts a bigger spotlight on who you elect as your prosecutor and whether or not they're actually going to set the partisan politics aside and try to focus on doing what makes sense in that county. These are definitely some challenges that I see in the commission structure and in the charter structure of any of the counties in Washington State where these types of conflicts come up, and not everybody's on the same page in how to resolve them. So it's very important to pay attention to local government. It's very important who you elect in local government. You're more likely to have conflicts like this when you have people who can't be on the same page and are politically opposed to each other. And particularly, when you have somebody, I think, who wants to stand up for the citizens, and that's a scary thing to those people who ideologically oppose them. And so this is kind of a very, very much one of those stories about irreconcilable differences here. And the court system will not be friendly to Sheriff Swank in Washington State, even if the citizens do reward him and support the policies that he's pushing. So this is really kind of a substantial fight that's going on in Pierce County. It really merits people paying attention to it, and also encouraging you again just to pay attention to who you've elected in your local office and who's running for those positions in the future. If you can't, if you aren't feeling comfortable with who those people are, it's definitely worth finding perhaps somebody different in the prosecutor's office who wouldn't have this type of conflict. So anyway, that's it. I just wanted to get that story out there. I've been, they look like a boring, wonkish story when you read the media, and yet I think it's actually worth digging into some of these stories because there's a bigger ripple effect in the rest of the community and the rest of the state based on what's happening in some of these places. Pierce County is no exception. And if you are interested and you have other comments, please feel free to leave those down below. I do try to reply to as many of those comments as possible. Get involved, pay attention to local government. By showing up, that's the only way to make an impact, because in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.